My uncle who used to do things to me passed away with $250,000 in student loans, and they were passed down to me to pay off. The justice system refused to help me, saying that law is law and that if I didn't pay, I'd lose my freedom. So I fought back. This old man in his 70s who I've never seen before showed up at my door, and when he told me why he was here, I seriously considered ending his life there and then. You see, when I was a little kid, I had this uncle named Andrew who had peculiar sexual preferences, to say the least. I was 7 years old when he cornered me in my room's closet and did whatever he wanted. My parents were home, but they were too busy arguing downstairs to notice their child getting R-worded 20 feet away from them. I remember it hurt to sit down in the following days, and when I approached my parents to tell them about it, not only did they not believe me, they gave out to me for making up such disgusting lies. In fact, they even invited Andrew over again that same weekend, specifically so I could apologize to him. I remember trembling in fear at the dinner table, being 7 years old surrounded by 3 intimidating adults all looking down on me. I ended up saying sorry to Andrew, and my parents too chimed in to apologize to him on my behalf. Well, as I'm sure you can guess, but Andrew did it again that same visit, in that same closet. We were both gone for maybe 5 minutes, and yet somehow, my parents never put the 2 and 2 together. Funnily enough, it was my teacher who noticed first. She asked me why I wasn't sitting down on my chair, and I just broke down. I asked her if I could whisper it to her, and I saw her face drop. She took me outside and kneeled down, and I just started crying. I told her about Andrew, about how my parents didn't believe me, and I remember asking her to please believe me. She called the cops on the spot, and before I even knew it myself, I was being taken in for questioning. The cop asked me to explain with action figures what exactly happened, but other than that, I don't remember much. All I know is that I stayed with some random people for a while until the trial day came around, and although my parents were not on the stand, they might as well have been, because their face was in the news, and our whole town knew what they did. The case was overwhelming for 7-year-old me. They may have been monsters, but they were still my family. I still remember how it felt getting up on the stand and in detail describing what he did to me. I remember how my father mouthed at me to shut up every time I opened my mouth, and how he mouthed, "Don't bother coming home," as soon as the sentence was given. My uncle was given 19 years, an especially harsh sentence because of his previous conviction relating to this. Watching him get taken away was hard, and watching my parents leave the courtroom without looking at me was even harder. Fast forward 21 years. I'm 28 years old, and I had fully gotten over all the fucked up trauma that I went through as a kid, or at least I thought I did, until some old guy knocked on my door. I opened up, and he had a suit on him as well as a briefcase. I told him he was probably at the wrong place, but he said no. "Are you the nephew of Andrew? Insert his last name." My world stopped. I slowly nodded. And that's when he gave me a piece of news that made me fully realize how messed up our legal system was. He told me my uncle passed away. I originally went to respond that I didn't care, but he interrupted me and kept talking. Apparently, I was my uncle's closest living relative, and my uncle had a lot of college debt left to pay off, $250,000 to be exact. And because college loans are the only kinds of loans that you cannot declare bankruptcy on, it means they can be passed down even after death. This is what happened to me. Thanks to our amazing legal system, I now had to pay off $250,000 in college loans for the man who molested me as a child repeatedly and ruined my life. I just stared at the guy in the suit and told him flat out I would not be paying. I told him what my uncle did, thinking it would persuade him, but he didn't even flinch. He told me he flat out didn't care. He told me my uncle could have culled my firstborn for all he cares. I had to pay the money, and if I didn't, I'd be facing 10 years in prison. I just stared at the old guy, my whole body going cold. 10 years in prison for something I didn't even agree to, for the man who ruined my childhood. I felt my hands shaking, and I clenched them into fists. The debt collector didn't even flinch, just stood there in his fancy suit waiting for me to break down or something. I told him to get the hell off my property before I called the cops. He laughed at me, actually laughed right in my face, and told me the cops wouldn't do a damn thing. He slid his business card into my hand and told me I had 30 days to start making payments, or they'd take legal action. I slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I spent the next hour pacing around my apartment, kicking furniture and punching walls until my knuckles were bloody. I couldn't believe this was happening. $250,000 for that monster's education. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I could think of, my friend Marcus from work. Marcus picked up on the third ring, and I spilled everything that happened. He was just as shocked as I was, kept saying, "That can't be legal," over and over. He suggested I talk to a lawyer right away, so I hung up and started searching online. I found a local guy named Richard Simmons, who specialized in debt law, and managed to get an appointment for the next day. I barely slept that night, just tossed and turned with nightmares about Andrew and prison cells and mountains of money I didn't have. I showed up at the lawyer's office looking like complete shit. Richard was an older guy with gray hair and thick glasses. I explained my situation, showing him the paperwork the debt collector had left. Richard frowned as he looked it over, then told me the bad news. In our state, certain debts can transfer to next of kin after death. He said he'd never seen it happen with student loans before, but the paperwork seemed legitimate. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Richard said he'd do some research and get back to me, but warned me it would cost money I didn't have. I left his office feeling even worse than before. I tried calling my Aunt Cheryl, my dad's sister, thinking maybe she'd help me out, or at least offer some advice. Big mistake. As soon as I mentioned Andrew's name, she got all cold and distant. She said I should never have made up those stories about him when I was a kid, that I tore the family apart with my lies. I hung up on her mid-sentence, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I called my cousin Peter next, but he wasn't any better. He said maybe this was karma for what I did to Andrew, getting him sent to prison all those years ago. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people were still defending that monster after all this time. I felt completely alone. I spent the next few days in a fog, going to work and coming home but not really processing anything. Richard the lawyer called me back on day 3 with more bad news. He said the debt was legitimate, and I had 2 options. Try to fight it in court, which would cost thousands in legal fees I didn't have, or set up a payment plan. I hung up and threw my phone across the room. I decided to try contacting the college where Andrew got his degree. Maybe they could help, or at least explain how this happened. I found the number for the financial aid office at Westfield University and called them. The woman who answered sounded bored out of her mind. I explained my situation, trying to keep my voice from cracking. She put me on hold for 20 minutes, then came back and told me there was nothing they could do. The loans were through a private company, not the school directly. She transferred me to another department, who transferred me again, and I ended up talking to some administrator named Gregory. Gregory was as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. He just kept repeating that the university had no authority over private loans after they were dispersed dispersed, I asked if they could at least provide documentation about what the loans were for when they were taken out, anything that might help my case. Gregory said I'd need to file a formal request, which could take weeks to process. I hung up feeling defeated again. The next day I got a call from the debt collection agency. Some woman named Tara wanted to discuss payment options. I told her I wasn't paying a dime for my molester's college education. Tara's voice didn't waver. She told me that the personal history between me and the deceased was irrelevant to the financial obligation. I lost it at that point, screaming into the phone about how F up the whole system was. Tara just waited until I ran out of steam, then calmly repeated that I needed to make payment arrangements. I hung up on her too. I tried calling a non-profit legal aid group in my city, hoping they might be able to help for free. They put me on a waiting list, saying they were backed up with cases. The receptionist sounded sympathetic at least, which was something. I went back to work the next day feeling like a zombie. My boss Kendra noticed something was wrong and pulled me aside. I ended up telling her everything. She looked horrified and offered to connect me with her brother-in-law, who worked at a law firm that specialized in estate issues. I thanked her, feeling the first glimmer of hope in days. Kendra's brother-in-law was named Thomas, and he agreed to meet with me after work. Thomas had a fancy office downtown with leather chairs and diplomas all over the walls. He listened carefully to my story, taking notes and nodding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. He told me that while it was unusual, some states do allow certain debts to transfer to next of kin. He said student loans were particularly nasty because they typically can't be discharged even in bankruptcy. Thomas said he'd look into it further, but warned me that fighting this might be an uphill battle. I left his office feeling slightly better but still terrified. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail summoning me to a small claims hearing about the debt. They were already taking legal action. I called Thomas immediately, and he agreed to go with me to the hearing. The courthouse was cold and intimidating. The debt collection company sent some slick lawyer in an expensive suit. The judge barely looked at me as the hearing began. The company's lawyer presented all the documentation showing Andrew's loans and my status as next of kin. When it was my turn to speak, I tried explaining that Andrew had sexually abused me as a child, that I hadn't spoken to him in over 20 years, that I wanted nothing to do with him or his debts. The judge looked uncomfortable but said that unfortunately, the law was clear on this matter. Thomas argued that forcing me to pay would be an additional victimization, but the judge said his hands were tied by the statutes. The judge scheduled another hearing in 2 weeks to determine the payment schedule. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Thomas patted my shoulder and promised we'd find a way to fight this. I wasn't so sure. I went home and started looking at my finances. I had about $7,000 in savings, a car worth maybe $12,000, and my apartment was rented. There was no way I could pay off $250,000. I'd either have to declare bankruptcy, which might not even help with student loans, or go to prison. Neither option seemed fair or reasonable. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night gasping for air. I couldn't focus at work. Kendra was understanding, but I could tell my performance was suffering. My coworkers started treating me differently, like they could sense something was wrong. I avoided them as much as possible. I decided to try one more angle and contacted my old therapist, Dr. Martinez. I hadn't seen her in years, but she remembered me right away. I explained what was happening, and she was outraged. She offered to write a letter to the court explaining the psychological impact this debt would have on me as a survivor of sexual abuse. I thanked her and accepted the offer, though I wasn't sure it would help. The day before the second hearing, Thomas called with some news. He'd been researching Andrew's case and discovered something interesting. Apparently, as part of Andrew's sentencing, he had been ordered to pay restitution to my parents for their legal fees and my therapy costs. According to the records, he never paid a penny of that restitution. Thomas said this might be our way out. If Andrew died owing a debt to my parents, and I was their heir, then technically Andrew's estate owed me money first. Any remaining assets would have to go toward paying that restitution before any other debts could be collected. Since my parents had passed away, I would be the one entitled to that restitution. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. The second hearing was even more tense than the first. The debt collection company's lawyer looked smug as we took our seats. Thomas presented our new argument about the restitution order, providing copies of the court documents from Andrew's criminal case. The company's lawyer objected, saying that restitution orders expired upon death. The judge called for a short recess to review the documents. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. When the judge returned, he looked thoughtful. He said that while the restitution order was valid, he needed more time to determine whether it took precedence over the student loan debt. He scheduled yet another hearing for the following month and ordered both sides to submit briefs on the legal precedents. I left the courthouse feeling slightly better but still anxious. The waiting was almost worse than a negative decision would have been. The debt collection company didn't wait for the next hearing to start pressuring me again. They called almost daily, each time with a different representative. They started sending letters threatening wage garnishment and property seizure. One particularly aggressive collector named Vincent showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in the lobby that left me mortified. Kendra threatened to call security on him, and he finally left. Thomas filed a harassment complaint against the collection agency, but they just denied any wrongdoing. The stress was taking a physical toll on me. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, and developed constant headaches. My friend Marcus convinced me to stay with him for a few days, just to get away from my apartment where the collectors might show up. I was grateful for the breathing room. The day of the final hearing arrived. Thomas had prepared an extensive brief showing legal precedents, where restitution orders took priority over other debts. The collection agency's lawyer had his own stack of cases supporting their position. The judge listened to both sides, asking detailed questions. I sat there feeling like my entire future hung in the balance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat and delivered his ruling. He determined that the restitution order did indeed take precedence over the student loan debt. Since Andrew had died with essentially no assets, there was nothing left to pay toward the student loans after the restitution was accounted for. The debt collection company couldn't force me to pay Andrew's loans because legally, his estate owed me money first. The judge dismissed the case against me. I sat there in shock as Thomas patted me on the back. The collection agency's lawyer looked furious but couldn't do anything about it. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I could finally breathe again for the first time in months. Thomas warned me that the company might try to appeal, but he thought we had a solid case if they did. I thanked him for everything, promising to pay his legal fees even though it would take a while. He told me not to worry about it, that helping me get justice was payment enough. I went back to Marcus's place and just collapsed on his couch, emotionally drained but relieved. The collection agency did try to appeal the decision, but the higher court upheld the judge's ruling. After 6 months of hell, I was finally free of Andrew's debt. The whole experience left me shaken though. I couldn't believe how close I'd come to having my life destroyed all over again by the same man who'd abused me as a child. I decided to channel my anger into something productive. I started volunteering at a local advocacy center for abuse survivors, sharing my story to help others. I also began working with a nonprofit that was pushing for changes to debt inheritance laws. My case wasn't unique. There were others out there facing similar situations. loans, forced to pay debts they never agreed to. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, and tried to put the whole nightmare behind me. I still had nightmares sometimes, but they were less frequent now. I felt stronger for having fought and won against a system that seemed designed to crush people like me. A year after the final ruling, I received a letter from Westfield University. They'd heard about my case through the media coverage it had generated, and they were implementing new policies to prevent similar situations in the future. They also offered me a full scholarship if I ever wanted to pursue a degree there. I appreciated the gesture, but decided college wasn't for me at this point in my life. I was doing okay at my job, and my volunteering work gave me a sense of purpose I'd never had before. Sometimes I think about Andrew and wonder if he knew what he was doing when he named me as his next of kin. Part of me thinks it was his final act of abuse, reaching out from beyond the grave to hurt me one last time, but I survived it, just like I survived everything else he did to me, and I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else the same way. The debt collection agency eventually went out of business after multiple lawsuits from people in situations similar to mine. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing they couldn't prey on vulnerable people anymore. Thomas helped me set up a trust that would protect any assets I might inherit in the future from similar claims. He became a good friend in the process, someone I could count on. My story ended up becoming part of a documentary about predatory debt collection practices, which helped raise awareness about the issue. Several states changed their laws as a result, making it harder for debts to be passed on to innocent relatives. I still think about how close I came to losing everything because of a broken system. It makes me angry, but it also motivates me to keep fighting for change. No one should have to pay for the crimes or debts of their abuser. That old debt collector in his fancy suit thought he could intimidate me into paying, but he underestimated how much fight I had left in me. Andrew took enough from me when I was a child. I wasn't going to let him or anyone else take my future too. These days, I try to focus on the positive. I have good friends, meaningful work, and my health. The nightmares come less frequently now, and when they do, I remind myself that I'm safe, that I won. Some people ask me if I've forgiven Andrew. I tell them forgiveness isn't what matters. Justice does. And finally, after all these years, I got a small measure of justice. Not just for myself, but for that scared 7-year-old boy who wasn't believed. I hope he would be proud of the man I've become and the fight I put up. Sometimes the system works, even if you have to force it to. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. And that victory lasted exactly 3 days, 7 hours, and 24 minutes. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the first email arrived. Just a simple notification from the court system. Nothing unusual there. I opened it without thinking. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my mouth. The appeal had been filed. Andrew's family had deep pockets, and they weren't done fighting. I set the mug down before I could drop it. My hands started to shake. The triumph I'd felt began to crack like thin ice. I called my lawyer right away. She promised to review the paperwork, but warned me appeals were standard. Nothing to worry about, she said. But I did worry. I worried every second of every day. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. The nightmares came back worse than before. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing his voice. 3 weeks later, we got the hearing date. 6 months away. 6 months of waiting. 6 months of looking over my shoulder. I tried to keep living normally. I went to work. I came home. I paid my bills, but the weight of it hung around my neck. My friends noticed I was withdrawing again. They invited me out more often. I rarely accepted. The local paper ran a follow-up story. The reporter called for comments. I let it go to voicemail. Then the letters started coming. Some people wrote to offer support. Others called me a liar. The worst ones came from Andrew's family. They detailed what they planned to do after winning the appeal. I kept them all in a folder. Evidence, my lawyer called it. Harassment, I called it. I installed a security camera on my porch, then one on my back door, then one in my driveway. I changed my phone number twice. I deleted my social media accounts. The isolation felt both terrible and necessary. Fall turned to winter. The days got shorter. The shadows in my apartment grew longer. I bought a dog from the local shelter, a big mutt with gentle eyes and a loud bark. I named him Justice. It felt a little on the nose, but it made me smile. Justice slept at the foot of my bed. His presence helped with the nightmares. Not always, but enough to matter. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone with Justice and a frozen pizza. New Year's too. I told myself I preferred it that way. The lie was wearing thin. February brought ice storms and a notice from the court. Andrew's lawyer had filed for a dismissal based on new evidence. My stomach dropped through the floor. I called my lawyer in a panic. She hadn't seen it yet. She called back 3 hours later. The new evidence was a supposed witness, someone claiming they saw me somewhere else when the incident happened. 20 years later, suddenly they remembered. My lawyer wasn't worried. The judge would see through it. I wasn't convinced. The system had failed me before. Why not again? I started preparing for the worst. I put money aside. I researched places to move. Maybe another state, maybe another country. I updated my passport just in case. The winter dragged on. Justice and I took long walks in the snow. The cold air helped clear my head. I started talking to my therapist twice a week instead of once. She suggested meditation. I tried it without much success. My mind wouldn't quiet down. It kept replaying courtroom scenarios. March arrived with more paperwork, motions and counter motions, legal language that made my head hurt. My lawyer explained it all patiently. Most of it went over my head anyway. The stress was affecting my job. I made mistakes I wouldn't normally make. My boss noticed. He was understanding, but his patience had limits. I needed this job. The legal bills were mounting despite the pro bono work. I forced myself to focus, to compartmentalize. Work during work hours. Panic only after 5. It wasn't a perfect system, but it helped. April brought rain and the dismissal of Andrew's motion. The judge saw through the fake witness. One small victory. I celebrated with takeout and ice cream. Justice got his own dog-safe ice cream cup. For one evening, things felt almost normal. Then May arrived. 1 month until the appeal hearing. I started rehearsing my testimony in the shower, in the car, while walking Justice. I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Andrew's lawyer would pounce on any inconsistency. The pressure built like a kettle about to whistle. I developed an eye twitch. My appetite disappeared. Justice would nudge my hand at dinner time, concerned about my untouched food. 2 weeks before the hearing, I got a call. Andrew wanted to meet. No lawyers, just us. I laughed until I realized the caller was serious. I hung up without answering. He called back immediately. I blocked the number. That night, someone drove by my house slowly, twice. I called the police. They took a report, but did nothing else. The next day, I bought a baseball bat. I kept it by my bed. Justice growled at every sound outside. I started sleeping in my living room. The couch gave me a better view of both doors. 1 week before the hearing, my lawyer called with news. The prosecutor had uncovered 3 more victims, all with similar stories. They were willing to testify. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Maybe the system wouldn't fail this time. Maybe justice wasn't just a dog's name. The day of the hearing arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. I wore my best suit. I shaved carefully. First impressions matter, my lawyer had said. The courthouse steps seemed steeper than I remembered. Reporters waited outside. I kept my head down and pushed pushed through. Security was tight. I was grateful for that. The courtroom looked smaller somehow. Andrew sat with his lawyer across the aisle. He had aged. His hair was thinner. He wore expensive clothes. Our eyes met briefly. I did not look away first. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings began with technical arguments. Legal terms flew back and forth. I watched the judge's face for clues. She betrayed nothing. The new victims testified one by one. Their stories aligned with mine in crucial ways. Details only someone who experienced it would know. Andrew's lawyer tried to poke holes in their testimony. He failed. When my turn came, I spoke clearly. I did not hesitate. I did not embellish. I told the simple truth. It was enough. The hearing lasted 3 days. On the third day, the judge denied the appeal. Andrew's face turned red, then white. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. I sat perfectly still, afraid to believe it was really over. The judge added a final ruling. Andrew would be listed on the sex offender registry, something that should have happened 20 years ago. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. I gave no comment. I walked to my car with my lawyer beside me. We didn't speak until we were safely inside. She congratulated me. I thanked her. Words seemed inadequate. I drove home in a daze. Justice greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm. I knelt and buried my face in his fur. The tears came then. Relief, not sadness. The weight wasn't completely gone, but it was lighter. Days passed, then weeks. No appeal of the appeal. My lawyer said that avenue was closed now. The case was truly over. First, began sleeping in my bed again. I deleted the security camera footage without watching it. I cooked real meals instead of eating cereal for dinner. Small steps toward normal. Summer arrived with warm breezes and longer days. I took a week off work. Justice and I drove to the beach. We walked along the shore every morning. I felt my shoulders gradually unknotting. One evening I watched the sunset over the ocean. The sky turned pink, then purple, then deep blue. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. When we returned home, I had a letter waiting. Not hate mail this time. A thank you note from one of the other victims. He wrote that my coming forward gave him courage. He'd been silent for decades. Now he was free too. I pinned his letter to my refrigerator. A reminder that some good had come from all this. Months passed. The nightmares became less frequent. I started accepting social invitations again. A drink after work, dinner with friends, a movie on the weekend. Justice adjusted to my new schedule with his usual adaptability. Fall brought cooler weather and a surprising phone call. A victims advocacy group wanted me to speak at their fundraiser. My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a public speaker, but the cause was important. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. I spent weeks preparing my speech. I practiced in front of Justice. He seemed impressed, or maybe just hopeful for treats. The night of the fundraiser arrived. My suit felt too tight, my tie too restrictive. The room was larger than I expected. More people too. I waited backstage fighting the urge to flee. Then they called my name. I walked to the podium on legs that felt like water. I looked out at the sea of faces. I took a deep breath, and I told my story. Not just the abuse, not just the trial, but everything that came after. The hard parts and the healing parts. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone joined in. They stood up one by one. A standing ovation. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't done it for applause. But the recognition felt like a balm on old wounds. After the speech, people lined up to talk to me, to share their stories, to thank me. I listened to each one. It was exhausting and exhilarating. I drove home feeling drained but fulfilled. Justice greeted me with his usual enthusiasm. Some things never changed. Winter arrived with snow and holiday decorations. This year I put up a small tree. I bought Justice a ridiculous reindeer costume. He tolerated it briefly for photos. I sent Christmas cards for the first time in years. I accepted an invitation to a New Year's party. Life was moving forward, not without difficulties. There were still bad days, still triggers that sent me spiraling, but they became less frequent, less overwhelming. I developed better coping mechanisms. I learned to recognize the signs earlier. One cold January morning, I got another unexpected call. A detective from another state. They'd found my name while investigating a similar case. Same perpetrator, different victim, different decade. They needed my testimony. Old feelings resurfaced immediately. Fear, anger, the desire to hide. But something new emerged alongside them. Determination, strength I hadn't known I possessed. I agreed to help. The investigation moved slowly, carefully, methodically building a case. I provided my statement multiple times. Each retelling became slightly easier. Not easy, but easier. Spring came again. Flowers pushed through the soil. Trees budded with new leaves. Justice and I extended our evening walks. The fresh air helped clear my head. The case in the other state moved toward trial. The prosecutor seemed confident. I tried to prepare myself for another courtroom, another cross-examination, another face-to-face with Andrew. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I could do it now. I'd done it before. I could do it again. Summer brought the trial date. I took time off work. I drove across state lines with Justice in the passenger seat. My lawyer came along as support. The hotel was pet-friendly. Justice made himself at home immediately. I paced the room most of the night. The courtroom in this state looked different. The procedures varied slightly, but the essence remained the same. Truth versus lies. Justice versus injustice. I took the stand and told my story again. Andrew's lawyer tried the same tired tactics. They fell flat. The jury saw through them. Other witnesses corroborated key details. The evidence was stronger this time. Technology had advanced. Records existed that hadn't 20 years ago. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I stayed for all of it. I wanted to support the new victim. She was younger than me. Braver too, I thought. She testified without wavering. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. The sentence came down harder this time. 20 years. No possibility of early release. I watched as they led Andrew away in handcuffs. His eyes found mine briefly. I saw no remorse there. Only anger. I felt nothing in return. Not satisfaction. Not joy. Not even relief. Just emptiness, where the fear had lived. The drive home seemed shorter somehow. Justice slept most of the way. My lawyer and I talked about nothing important. Weather, sports, roadside attractions, normal things. I found comfort in the mundane. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Work, home, friends, exercise, therapy less frequently now. The nightmares came rarely. When they did, they had lost their power to paralyze. I could wake up, orient myself, and return to sleep. Progress, my therapist called it. I called it freedom. Fall brought another letter. The advocacy group wanted me to join their board, to help shape policy, to work with lawmakers. I surprised myself by accepting immediately. The work would be challenging. It would mean revisiting painful memories, but it would also mean purpose, meaning, a way to transform suffering into action. Winter arrived again. colder than the previous year, more snow. Justice loved it. He bounded through drifts taller than himself. His joy was contagious. I found myself laughing more easily, smiling at strangers, accepting kindness without suspicion. The board meetings began in January, twice monthly at first. I met others with similar stories, different details but the same core experience. We connected instantly, understanding without explanation. The work was both difficult and rewarding. We drafted proposals, met with legislators, spoke at community events. Slowly, incrementally, we began to see change. Laws strengthened, statutes of limitations extended, resources increased for victims. Each small victory felt enormous. Spring came with renewed energy. The advocacy work expanded. I began mentoring younger survivors, showing them the path I had walked, warning them of the pitfalls, celebrating their steps forward. I watched them grow stronger. It healed something in me I hadn't realized was still broken. Summer arrived hot and humid. Justice was now 7 years old, slower on our walks, more naps during the day. Still my most faithful companion. We celebrated his birthday with special treats and a new toy. He destroyed it within hours. Some things never changed. The anniversary of the first trial passed without me noticing. It was my therapist who pointed it out. 3 years now. 3 years of rebuilding, of reclaiming, of rediscovering who I was beyond what happened to me. I wasn't just a victim anymore, not just a survivor either. I was something more complex, more complete. Fall brought cooler temperatures and unexpected news. Andrew had died in prison. Heart attack, the report said. No suspicious circumstances. I sat with this information for a long time, trying to understand what I felt. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but not grief either. Perhaps it was simply closure, the final period at the end of a very long sentence. I told my therapist about it at our next session. She asked how I felt. I struggled to articulate it. Eventually I said it felt like putting down a heavy backpack I'd carried for decades. The weight was gone. The memory of the weight remained. Winter came again. Holiday plans, board meetings, regular life. I decorated my house more elaborately this year. I hosted a small gathering for friends. Justice wore his reindeer costume for almost 10 minutes. A new record. We toasted the new year with hope, with plans, with the quiet certainty that while the past shaped us, it did not define us. Spring arrived with gentle rains and new possibilities. I was promoted at work. The advocacy group expanded to neighboring states. Justice developed a slight limp, but remained enthusiastic about our walks. I adjusted the pace to accommodate him. We took more breaks, enjoyed the journey rather than the distance. Summer came with an unexpected opportunity. A book publisher reached out. They wanted me to tell my story, not just the trial, not just the aftermath, the whole journey. I hesitated initially. Writing it all down seemed daunting, reliving it page by page, but perhaps it could help others. Perhaps it could change minds. I agreed to consider it. Fall brought decision time. I signed the book contract. I began writing in the evenings. Justice curled at my feet as I typed. The words came slowly at first, then faster, sometimes painful, sometimes cathartic, always honest. Winter arrived with the first draft completed. The editing process began, cutting, clarifying, strengthening. The book took shape gradually. Like healing, it wasn't linear. It moved forward, backward, sideways. Eventually, it became whole. Spring came with final approvals, cover design, marketing plans, publication date set for summer. I felt nervous and excited, exposed and empowered. Justice seemed to sense my conflicting emotions. He stayed closer than usual. His presence remained my greatest comfort. Summer arrived with book launch preparations, interviews scheduled, speaking engagements lined up, my first television appearance booked. I bought a new suit, practiced sound bites, prepared for difficult questions. The book released in July. Reviews came quickly, mostly positive, some negative. I tried not to read them all. The sales numbers exceeded expectations. Not that I had any. More important were the messages from readers, people who saw themselves in my story, who found hope in my journey. Fall brought a book tour, cities across the country, hotel rooms, bookstore events. Justice stayed with a friend. I missed him terribly. The crowds were larger than expected. The questions sometimes difficult. I answered honestly always. No embellishment, no minimizing. Just the truth, as I had lived it. Winter came with a return to normal life. The book tour ended. The interviews became less frequent. Justice and I resumed our routine. Slower walks, more naps, quiet evenings at home. The book continued selling. Schools adopted it for psychology courses. Advocacy groups used it for training. It took on a life beyond me. Spring arrived with unexpected recognition, awards nominations, speaking requests from universities, an honorary degree from my alma mater. I accepted with grace but private amazement. This wasn't why I had written the book, but the platform allowed me to advocate more effectively. I used it accordingly. Summer came hot and bright. Justice turned 10, his muzzle now completely gray, his steps deliberately slow. We celebrated with his favorite treats. The vet warned me his time was limited. I promised to make his remaining days comfortable, full of love. I owed him that and more. Fall brought both sadness and celebration. Justice passed peacefully one cool October morning, his head in my lap, his eyes trusting to the end. I buried him in the backyard under his favorite tree. I planted flowers that would bloom in spring. Later that same month, the governor signed legislation bearing my name, the Justice Act, extending protections for victims, removing barriers to reporting, a legacy that would outlive us all. Winter arrived with quiet reflection. A decade had passed since I first came forward, a decade of struggle and growth, of setbacks and victories, of darkness and unexpected light. I sat by my window watching snow fall. The house felt emptier without justice, but not empty of purpose, not empty of hope. Spring came with new beginnings. I adopted another dog, a senior with sad eyes and a gentle soul. I named him Courage. He was nothing like Justice. That was perfect. He needed different things, moved at a different pace, taught me different lessons. We adapted to each other gradually. Summer arrived with anniversary reflections. My book had been out 1 year. The advocacy group had achieved significant victories. The mentoring program had expanded nationwide. Progress wasn't always visible day to day, but looking back, the change was undeniable. Fall brought unexpected peace. The nightmares had stopped completely. The anxiety appeared rarely now. The hypervigilance had faded to normal caution. I wasn't defined by what happened anymore. It was part of my story, an important part, but not the whole story, not the ending. Winter came with fresh snow and clear perspective. Courage learned to play in the drifts, different from Justice but joyful in his own way. I watched him with a full heart. The journey hadn't been easy. It wouldn't always be easy going forward, but I had found something valuable along the way. Not just justice, something more personal, more profound. I had found myself again, the self that existed before the trauma, and the stronger self that emerged through surviving it. Spring arrived with gentle warmth and new growth, exactly as it always did, reliable in its renewal, predictable in its promise. I stood in my garden watching buds form on trees, listening to birds return from southern migrations, feeling the sun on my face without shadows. I knew then what I would tell that 7-year-old boy, that the road would be long, that the fight would be hard, that justice would come late, but it would come, and that one day he would stand in the sunshine, free, whole, himself again, but stronger. I knew strength came from breaking, from being remade in fire. Like pottery, sometimes we must crack before becoming whole again. The 7-year-old boy would understand this someday. I dug my fingers into the spring soil, earth packed under my nails. The dirt felt alive with potential. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with fresh air. Birds called to each other overhead. Their songs reminded me of freedom. I had found mine at last. The memories still came unbidden sometimes. Dark flashes of what happened. The crash, the hospital, the years of rehabilitation, the lawsuit that dragged on forever. I shook my head to clear those thoughts away. Today wasn't for looking backward. Spring demanded forward motion, growth. I grabbed my trowel from the garden bench. The wooden handle felt smooth and familiar. I began turning the soil for this year's tomatoes. My back protested, but I pushed through. Physical pain meant nothing compared to what I'd survived. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the mild temperature. I wiped it away with my sleeve. The neighbor's dog barked from across the fence. I waved at Mrs. Henderson as she collected her mail. She waved back with a tentative smile. People still treated me differently, like I might break or explode. I couldn't blame them. They'd seen the news, read the papers, watched the trial unfold. I jabbed the trowel deeper into the earth. The metal hit a stone with a dull clang. I worked it loose from the soil. The rock was ordinary, gray, unremarkable. I tossed it in the bucket with others. Even the plain stones had to be cleared for growth, just like the obstacles in life. I thought about writing to him again. The boy, my nephew. He'd be 14 now, growing into himself, facing middle school drama and hormones. I wondered if he remembered me from before, from when I was whole the first time, before everything changed. I hadn't seen him since the sentencing. 7 years without his smile, without watching him grow. My sister thought it best to keep distance, to protect him from the ugliness. I understood, but it still hurt. I finished preparing the soil as clouds drifted overhead. The temperature dropped slightly. I shivered, but kept working. Physical labor kept the thoughts at bay, kept me anchored in the present. I reached for the seedlings I'd started indoors, tiny green promises in biodegradable pots. I'd nurtured them through late winter, watched them push through soil toward light. My therapist said gardening was good therapy. She wasn't wrong. I placed each seedling in its hole with care, covered the roots gently with soil, whispered encouragement though I felt foolish doing it. Plants don't have ears, but maybe they feel intention. I watered each one thoroughly. The ground darkened with moisture. Life needs basics to thrive. Water, sunlight, safety. I hadn't felt safe for so long. The trial changed everything. Public opinion split wildly. Half believed him, half believed me. The evidence eventually spoke for itself. His DNA under my fingernails, my blood on his clothes, the witnesses who came forward. Too late, but they came. Justice moves slowly, but it does move. I stood up straight, stretching my aching back. The row of seedlings looked vulnerable, exposed. I knew how they felt. The wind picked up suddenly. Branches swayed overhead. The weather report mentioned afternoon storms. I gathered my tools quickly. Dirt cascaded from metal surfaces. I'd finish tomorrow if the rain held off. Inside my small house, I washed my hands thoroughly. Soil disappeared down the drain in brown rivulets. The mirror showed my face, still mine but different, older, wiser, sadder too, but alive. So very alive. I made tea while rain began pattering against windows. The kettle whistled sharply in the quiet house. I poured steaming water over a bag of chamomile. The fragrance rose with the steam. Small comforts meant everything now. I sat at my kitchen table watching raindrops race down glass. The storm intensified quickly. Lightning flashed in the distance. I counted seconds until thunder followed. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. The boom rattled windows slightly. The storm was getting closer. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. I ignored it. Nature would do what nature does. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring the warmth. My thoughts drifted back to the letter I'd been writing. Words seemed inadequate for what I wanted to say. How do you explain trauma to a teenager? How do you describe recovery without the gory details? I'd tried drafting it a dozen times. Each attempt ended in the trash. Perhaps some things needed saying in person. I watched the rain turn my freshly planted garden to mud. The seedlings bent under the onslaught but didn't break. They were stronger than they looked, just like me. The phone rang, startling me from thoughts. My sister's name appeared on screen. Speak of the devil. My heart raced as I answered. Her voice sounded tight with emotion. The boy wanted to see me. My nephew was asking questions about what happened, about why his uncle wasn't allowed contact, about court cases and restraining orders, about why adults whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. My hand trembled as I held the phone. I hadn't prepared for this day to come so soon. My sister waited for my response. I agreed to meet them next weekend at the park downtown. Neutral territory for everyone. I hung up feeling dizzy with possibility. 7 years evaporated in an instant. The rain slowed to a gentle patter. My tea had gone cold while I wasn't paying attention. I dumped it in the sink, made a fresh cup with shaky hands. The possibility of reconnection overwhelmed me. I needed to prepare myself, emotionally, mentally. I spent the week in nervous anticipation. I cleaned my house obsessively, though they wouldn't see it. I baked cookies, then threw them out, then baked more. I weeded the garden between spring showers. The seedlings had survived the downpour. Some even looked stronger for it. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, sunshine and mild temperatures. A good omen, perhaps. I dressed carefully in casual clothes. Nothing that screamed victim or survivor. Just a normal aunt meeting her nephew. I arrived at the park 30 minutes early. Couldn't sit still at home. I chose a bench near the playground. Children's laughter filled the air. Parents chatted in clusters nearby. Normal life continuing all around me. I spotted them before they saw me. My sister looked older, more lines around her eyes. The boy walked beside her, taller than I expected, lanky with adolescence. His father's build, but his mother's eyes. My heart constricted at the sight. I stood on wobbly legs, raised my hand in greeting. The boy noticed me first. Recognition dawned on his face. He broke into a run. His mother called after him. Too late. He crashed into me with an enthusiastic hug. Arms wrapped tight around my waist, face pressed against my shoulder. I froze momentarily, then melted. Returned the embrace with equal fervor. He remembered me. He didn't hate me. He didn't blame me. The relief nearly buckled my knees. My sister approached more cautiously, her expression guarded but hopeful. We exchanged awkward greetings, made small talk about the weather, about school, about anything but the past. The boy asked questions with teenage bluntness. We answered carefully, age appropriately. with measured honesty. We walked around the park together, the boy between us like a bridge, a connection rebuilt one step at a time. Ice cream happened. Chocolate for him, vanilla for his mother, strawberry for me, sweet normalcy on our tongues. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. Promises were made to meet again, numbers exchanged, photos taken on phones. The goodbye hug lingered longer than the hello. I watched them walk away feeling lighter. Something broke loose inside me, something that had been stuck, frozen in that terrible time. I drove home with windows down. Spring air rushed through the car. Music played from the radio. I sang along badly. Life moved forward whether I was ready or not. The garden had dried out nicely in the sunshine. I checked on my seedlings before sunset. They stood straighter now, growing visibly each day. I added plant food to their soil. A little boost never hurt. My phone chimed with a message. My sister had sent photos from our meeting. The boy's smile wide and genuine. My own smile tentative but real. Progress captured digitally. I saved them all. Set one as my phone background. A visual reminder of why healing mattered. The next few weeks established new patterns. Sunday calls with my nephew. Occasional dinners with both of them. Small steps toward normal family relations. My therapist noted improvements in my demeanor. I felt it too. A lightness that hadn't been there before. The garden flourished under spring's progression. Tomato plants doubled in size. Bean vines climbed eagerly up poles. Zucchini threatened to overtake everything. Life pushing forward relentlessly. I received a letter from the parole board. His first hearing approached. My testimony would be needed again. Old fear bubbled up instantly. I called my sister immediately. We met for coffee that afternoon. Talked through options and feelings. She offered to accompany me. Support looked different now. More balanced. Less fragile. We decided to tell my nephew together. In simplified terms, he deserved some truth. His reaction surprised us both. Maturity beyond his years. Questions that showed understanding. Anger on my behalf. Protection in his young eyes. Summer arrived with oppressive heat. The garden required daily watering. Dawn and dusk became my outdoor hours. Midday sun proved too intense, like the parole hearing looming on the horizon. I practiced my statement with my therapist. Words carefully chosen for impact, for truth, for healing, not for vengeance, never for vengeance. The hearing came and went. I spoke my piece calmly, made eye contact with board members, avoided looking at him entirely. Didn't need to see his face again, not ever. They denied his parole. 3 more years minimum. Relief flooded through me afterward. 3 years to strengthen further, to build more resilient boundaries, to live without looking over my shoulder. My nephew asked to stay overnight at my house. His first solo visit. We made pizza from scratch, watched movies too loud, stayed up too late. Normal family things, beautiful in their ordinariness. I showed him how to care for the garden. His initial boredom turned to interest. He named the biggest tomato plant Bob. We laughed until our sides hurt. Summer faded into early fall. The garden yielded its bounty generously. I canned tomatoes for winter, froze beans and pesto, shared zucchini with everyone I knew. My nephew started high school, nervous energy and excitement. I attended his first band concert, sat beside my sister without awkwardness, clapped until my hands hurt, took too many pictures. Life's normal rhythms returned in unexpected ways. I started painting again. Landscapes mainly, gardens and horizons, open spaces and possibilities. My therapist called it progress. I called it necessary. The colors helped process what words couldn't. Autumn leaves turned brilliant shades. I raked them into piles, jumped in them once when no one was looking, felt childish joy bubble up unexpectedly, started volunteering at the community garden, teaching others what saved me, soil and seeds and patience, growth happening right before our eyes, met new people who knew nothing about my past, who saw me as I am now, not as what happened to me, made actual friends for the first time in years. Winter arrived with the first snow. I watched flakes dust my dormant garden, nature resting before renewal. I felt myself entering a similar phase, consolidating growth, preparing for next stages. Christmas involved family this year. My sister hosted dinner. My nephew played holiday songs on his trumpet, badly, but with enthusiasm. We exchanged modest gifts. Being together was the real present. New Year's Eve brought quiet reflection. I wrote in my journal about the year's progress, about unexpected healing, about family rebuilt, about strength found in vulnerability. I called my nephew at midnight, heard celebration in the background, his voice cracking between boy and man, promising to come help with spring planting. I slept peacefully that night, without nightmares, without the past intruding. January brought planning for the new garden. Seed catalogs arrived daily. I marked pages with possibilities. My nephew circled the weird vegetables, purple carrots, striped tomatoes. We plotted garden expansion together. February thaw revealed muddy earth, too early for planting, but not for dreaming. I started seedlings indoors again, tiny pots lined windowsills, green shoots reaching for light, each one a promise, each one hope made visible. March winds blew winter away gradually. I cleaned garden beds of debris, turned soil to welcome spring again. My sister joined me one weekend, brought coffee and conversation, worked alongside without being asked. Healing comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it looks like dirty hands. The anniversary of the attack arrived quietly. I acknowledged the date without drowning in it, lit a candle for who I was before, thanked her for surviving, for becoming me. My nephew called that evening, as if he somehow knew. We talked about normal things, school, music, summer plans. The sound of his voice anchored me in the present. April brought his 15th birthday. I baked a ridiculous cake, 3 layers with too much frosting, his favorite colors and flavors. His smile was worth every minute, every mess in my kitchen, worth every second of the journey here. The garden called me back outside daily. Spring unfurled in predictable glory. Daffodils trumpeted yellow announcements. Birds built nests in nearby trees. I planted peas and lettuce in cool soil, early crops eager for head start. My therapist suggested reducing our sessions, monthly instead of weekly. A victory acknowledged quietly, progress measured in practical terms. I agreed with only minor anxiety. May delivered sunshine and growth spurts. Garden plants shot upward dramatically. My nephew grew another inch seemingly overnight. My confidence expanded in similar fashion. I accepted an invitation to speak at a survivors group. Shared my story simply. No embellishments needed. Truth carries its own power. Several women approached afterward, eyes showing recognition, understanding without words needed, connection and shared experience, different details but same core. June brought graduation ceremonies. My nephew finished freshman year with honors. My sister hosted a small celebration. I brought veggies from the garden, made fresh salsa everyone praised, belonged there without question or doubt. July heat tested garden and gardener alike. I installed soaker hoses for efficiency, mulched heavily to retain moisture, adapted to changing conditions, listened to what the plants needed, gave them support where required, space where beneficial. My sister announced dating someone new, asked my opinion nervously. I gave honest encouragement. Her happiness mattered tremendously, life continuing as it should. August harvests overwhelmed my kitchen. I taught my nephew to make pasta sauce, showed him how tomatoes become sustenance, how work becomes nourishment, how patience yields results. We talked about the future openly, his dreams of college and travel, my hopes for continued healing, for maybe dating someday, for normal things once impossible to imagine. September cooled the air noticeably. Garden production slowed accordingly. I cleared spent plants systematically, saved seeds for next season carefully. Continuity matters in gardens and lives. The 3-year mark approached steadily. Another parole hearing scheduled soon. I prepared differently this time, with confidence, not fear, with boundaries, not panic. October painted leaves in fiery hues. I raked them into garden beds as mulch. Protection for the soil beneath. Decomposition feeding future growth. Everything serves purpose eventually, even the parts that fall away. The hearing notification arrived by mail. I opened it without trembling hands, read the date without racing heart. Progress measured in physical responses, in emotions managed, not avoided. November brought the actual hearing. I testified clearly and concisely, made my case for continued incarceration. His rehabilitation seemed questionable at best. The board agreed unanimously. 5 more years minimum. Relief came differently this time. Less desperate, more measured. I celebrated quietly with family dinner, with normal conversation, with pumpkin pie and laughter. December wrapped the year in reflection. I stood in my dormant garden one evening. Snow-dusted raised beds like powdered sugar. Stars pierced the clear night sky brilliantly. I breathed deeply of winter's clean air. Thought about cycles and seasons, about necessary dormancy before growth, about patience and persistence, about 7 years of healing, about what came next in this journey. I went inside to write another letter. This one I would actually send to the boy now almost grown, to my nephew who bridged past and future. I told him everything I'd learned about strength and breaking and rebuilding, about gardens and growth and second chances, about standing in sunshine after long darkness, about being free and whole and stronger. I sealed the envelope with peaceful certainty, addressed it with steady hands, added extra stamps just because, placed it by the door for morning mailing. Spring would come again. It always does, with warmth and new growth, with birds returning home, with sunshine without shadows, with promise kept faithfully, year after year after year.